We are reading from The Rape of the Mind by Mind.wmv, MD, and we are in Chapter 14. The Turncoat in Each of Us, the confusing influence of the problem of treason and loyalty. As soon as treason is mentioned, something in man's soul is stirred. Anger and scorn, suspicion and anxiety are aroused, and people want to avoid the subject. The social reaction toward a traitor, even before we are certain that the accusation is deserved, is very spectacular. Former friends of a man accused as a traitor retreat and withdraw from this token of evil. In every trial of traitors we feel inwardly, personally accused and guilty. This is one of the reasons that treason trials make such deep impressions and provoke the most confusing discussions. Dictators can use such trials to cast a spell on the public. In a book on mental coercion and the rape of the mind, an investigation of the problem of treason and loyalty is needed. The involuntary traitor. Self-betrayal comes out of all human pores, and that was said by Sigmund Freud. In my hometown in Holland, there was a little barber shop quite near the government buildings. It was owned by a small man with a gray French beard. Through the years, he had served many of the country's most important men, diplomats and cabinet ministers, proud generals and aggressive leaders of the opposition. They all wanted his service. The little barber was always very courteous and agreeable, eager to please his clients. He danced with prim, servile gestures around them while curling their hair and looking after their mustaches. As he worked, he would ask his distinguished clients polite questions. What is His Excellency so-and-so going to say about this bill? What does the Minister of State feel about that one? He was not really interested in politics at all, but the little barber knew that his clients were flattered by such questions. And then one day a puffy, beribboned German general walked in and settled himself in the barber's chair. The Netherlands had been invaded and occupied by the Nazi hordes. Of course, our barber knew this, and he had even managed to hate the invaders for a few days. But he was innately a genteel soul, and he lathered the general's face himself and took care not to soil his uniform. On succeeding days, others of these strangely uniformed men appeared in the shop, and the little barber served them all well. The military men were followed by the brown shirts and then the green shirts of the Gestapo. The leather of the barber's chair was scuffed by the huge black boots. But the little barber did not complain, and soon the occupiers considered his haircut the most fashionable and best that could be obtained in the entire city. Our barber was not too conscious of his increasing official importance. He danced attendance on his new clients with as much courtesy as he had showed the diplomats of the old days. He was sorry that his old acquaintances had gradually disappeared. But in the past his work had been seasonal. When Parliament was not in session, his shop had been empty. Now his business flourished all the time. The Germans and the collaborators liked the little barber shop, the perfume, the barber's skill. Indeed, our amiable friend was well liked by the uniformed oppressors. They were, after all, thoroughly unused to friendly treatment. The barber's behavior was a welcome change from the contempt with which most of the Dutch people, those stupid, stubborn resistors, regarded them. One day the barber was invited to buy a membership card in a newly formed organization of collaborators. Our friend responded to this request as he would have to any other appeal for charity. He did not like to give, but he thought of welfare as a special tax on business, and so he resigned himself to paying as a petty necessary annoyance. Some of his old acquaintances warned him of the consequences. He would be accused of collaboration and treason, but he pacified them by saying, "I am a barber, and I live as a barber. I have absolutely no interest in politics. I only want to serve my clients." When after the bitter years of struggle and oppression, liberation came, our friend became officially known as a traitor and a collaborator. When the black-booted uniformed supermen were thrown out, their collaborating friends were imprisoned, and the barber among them. After he had served a part of his sentence, a wise and forgiving judge sent our barber back to his little shop. The first excitement of liberation had passed, and people were becoming more willing to forgive those who had been collaborators because they had been weak-hearted. Our story is by no means finished. The barber came back from prison a beaten man. He had been in jail for 3 months. He still could not understand what had happened to him. He brooded constantly over his shameful days in jail. An injustice had been done him. He had served his fellow men as a well-behaved, virtuous citizen should, and he had been treated like a criminal. He felt self-righteous, abused, insulted, maltreated, and misunderstood. After all, he had only wanted to be kind and helpful. He was a barber, nothing more. The barber could not rid himself of his bitterness and resentment. None of his former friends came to cheer him up or to sympathize with him. His old clients did not return. His sadness and depression increased daily, and in a few months he took his own life. And so ended the adventures of a little barber who had been completely unaware of his collaboration and his treachery. I knew this man. I do not despise him, not at all. I am sure there were many such pitiful collaborators. I wonder, though, why the little barber was so unaware. Was it stupidity? Had his apparent kindness always covered up a resentment against his fellow men? Was he misled by an insidious wave of suggestion stronger than his mental capacity to resist? We will never know. This tragedy, caused perhaps by unawareness, perhaps by the inability to choose between conflicting loyalties, stimulated me to investigate the problem of the traitor. I had ample opportunity to study this question, both through my experiences with the Dutch underground during the Nazi occupation and when I was imprisoned in a Vichy detention camp. My first official analysis was made in 1943 when the Dutch government asked me to prepare a psychological report on disloyal Dutch soldiers and citizens being held in detention on the Isle of Man. I arrived at the prison after a hazardous, stormy journey in a small airplane. The prisoners were a sorry lot. I had anticipated hostility, but I had not expected to find so many weaklings, consumed by bitterness and anger. Some of them were typical of the passive, egotistic, psychopathic personality, whose motto seems to be, "Let the world go to hell, I will never conform." Others seemed to be the victims of an unbearable inner struggle, a conflict between their desire to belong to the stronger group and their resistance to this desire, a resistance which only increased their bitterness and antagonism. This was a situation which proved to me again that there are certain times when logic and discussion are no help at all. We tried over and over again to convince the semi-collaborators that they should join with us in the fight against the Nazis, but they only retreated further behind their private grudges. They even refused the cigarettes I offered them. Bad as the trip to the prison had been, the trip back was even worse. The little plane was pushed off course by strong winds. I was depressed and disgusted by my experiences, and when we finally arrived in England, both the pilot and I were sick. I had many opportunities thereafter to study spies, traitors, and subversives. My last official wartime investigation took me to a prison camp in Suriname, Dutch Guinea, where I had made a collective report on all the inhabitants of the prison camp. In many of them I could discern neurotic and even psychotic traits. And I'll stop right there. And that was part 1 of chapter 14. And I'll see you all in part 2, and we are reading from, once again, The Rape of the Mind, The Psychology of Thought Control, Menticide, and Brainwashing by Just A.M. Merleau, M.D.